Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. Through our first bleed to our last, we come to know ourselves more deeply. This is a platform to reclaim the sacredness of all of it. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach, specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Welcome back, women. I am still here in the chilly Sacred Valley of Peru. It's actually quite warm during the day, but at night I get to cozy up in all of my layers. I've got my alpaca beanie and my alpaca like shawl here. It's been really sweet to be here the last, gosh, has it been almost a month? A little less than a month here in Peru. And this valley just continues to inspire me and to hold me. At the time of this recording, it's June 10th, and so we're on the eve of the full moon. And I was just outside with Laura, my business partner, who I co-host the Women's Nourished and Thriving retreat here in Peru with. And we were just giving all of our gratitude for this land, for the women who attended our retreat, for the women who are in our programs and who have attended our classes and who are receiving the wisdom of their cycles and learning to create the life of their dreams with us. It's just so absolutely inspiring. And yeah, I'm just feeling really grateful, just really feeling so much gratitude for the role I get to hold here in bringing women's stories to the forefront. So if you're here listening, thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for caring about the amazing women's stories who are on this podcast. Thank you for caring about your body and tuning into your cycle and your womb. It's like the more that I do this work, it's like I love doing it. I love talking about the cycle. If you know me, if you've listened to this podcast, if you follow me on Instagram, you know I'm a total nerd about this stuff. Like I could talk about the cycle phases and nutrition and hormones and women's rites of passage and periods and blood all day. And sometimes it feels like, like why? Like why am I doing this? Or what's sort of the bigger purpose? I have my why. I know my why. I know how important this work is, but to see how it actually changes women's lives and the breakthroughs they have about their bodies, about their cycles, about today, Laura and I taught a workshop here in Pisac in Peru, in person, which was so beautiful. And one woman said, I was talking about going from the ovulatory energy to the luteal energy and how in ovulatory you're magnetic and you're going to magnetize more opportunities and more people and how you can really harness that energy, which is something I teach in intentional maidenhood and the retreat and upcoming mentorship that Laura and I are doing, which I'll have more details for you on next week. But she was saying like, wow, I noticed that I was walking through the streets in my ovulatory energy and so many people were approaching me for conversations. And then I went into my luteal phase. She was on day 29 today. And she was like, and I felt like people weren't approaching me as much, or I didn't feel like approaching people as much. And wow, so there's nothing wrong with me. And I actually started tearing up because that is a huge part of my why with this work is like, there's nothing wrong with you. You are simply a cyclical woman. And you were never designed to be separated from that. You were designed for it to be your power and for your cycle to be a means to knowing yourself deeply, all of the different versions of you, all of the different archetypes, which is such the crux of my work. It's like I see clients, I do these one-on-one sessions, I support women with their hormones and these very practical, really important healing methodologies. And another part of the work that I love is this cyclical archetypal lens of the cycle to support women to truly know themselves. That was actually one of my favorite parts of the Nourished and Thriving retreat is each day, and we'll be doing this in the retreat in the fall too. Each day, we honored a different one of our feminine archetypes of our cycle. And so in the maiden phase, we were all like interviewing each other's inner maidens. And it was so funny. We just totally ignited the maiden energy. And in the mother, we were giving and receiving touch and claiming our queendom and what we want to see in the world, embodying the magnetism of that phase. And in our inner autumn in the luteal day, we were claiming like our inner bitch and like moving very primally and working with that like inner critic energy. And when we got to the menstrual phase day, we did a beautiful menstrual menarche reclamation ceremony to re-imprint our first bleeds and really honor our blood. And one of the women even said in that after that ceremony that it was psyche imprinting. And it just reminds me that this work goes so deep. And it is both about understanding our bodies on a practical and mundane level and connecting with the deep psychological and spiritual need we have to live as cyclical beings as women. So, yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying thank you for being here. And if you're interested in joining us in the next Nourished and Thriving retreat, it is October 31st this fall, 2025, to November 8th in the Sacred Valley of Peru. These mountains and their rivers and the plants and the spiritual forces here are so strong and beautiful. I want to bring all the women here to hug each other and heal their wombs and have fun and play and cry and yeah. So we have pre-sale pricing going. Actually, it's early bird. We have early bird until June 21st, summer solstice. So it's the lowest it'll be at now. You can fill out the application before then and still get your pre-sale pricing, your early bird pricing, excuse me. Pre-sale will start after that, and that will be a little higher. It will be until August 1st, and then it'll go up to full price after that until the retreat on October 31st. So if you're interested, you can find the link to that in the show notes, as well as the links for everything else, one-on-one sessions, my mentorship for women, rather my membership for women, the herbal shop, the cyclical playlists, my Instagram account, and Jasmine's Instagram account. So today on the podcast, we have an incredibly special episode with a woman whose work has personally changed my life. So I won't share it now because I share in the episode how Jasmine's work has specifically changed my life, but suffice it to say, in one of her containers was one of the most pivotal moments I've had in my life. And it brings me to tears every time I think about it. And I'm so grateful I have the opportunity to be in relationship with Jasmine now. She is such a wonderful woman who is doing such deep and beautiful work in the world, all informed by her own lived experiences and her womb's voice. So, Jasmine Rose is a ceremonial body worker and a woman of the womb who has spent the last nearly decade of her life devotedly tending to her body, her blood, and her womb in a way that the word reverential doesn't even really do justice. Um, yeah, deeply informed by her year of bleeding thick black blood and her 7-year conscious conception journey following that. Jasmine speaks beautifully to the energy of aligning to the frequency of mother and treating her blood as the most sacred of medicines. We touch on remembering the mother tongue of your body, in Jasmine's words, imprinting young girls with love for their bodies and their blood, and embodied generational healing. Jasmine has such a poetic way of weaving physiology and mystery into telling the story of her life, and I know that you'll be absolutely enthralled. This is a true gem of an episode that is not to be missed. So let's tune right in. All right. Hey, Jasmine, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Natalie. Oh, it feels like such a long time coming, and arriving here today is just joy.
Yeah, I know. I feel that too. I feel really happy and excited to get into this conversation with you. Especially because I'll just share this now. Like I was sharing with you before we hit record that your work is really special to me. And I've shared this, I think probably on other episodes of this podcast, but definitely on my friend Sydney's podcast, which is called Sacred Reclamation. One of the stories I shared on there was this journey I went on that was such a pinnacle moment in my womb healing journey of feeling like I needed to be able to bring my hands inside my yoni and not being able to do that from this sort of psychological point for many years and feeling like, why can't I do this? What's going on? And I think all of my kind of desperate Google searches led to some targeted posts on Instagram, and I found your account. And it was in, I believe it was 2022. I joined one of your rooted journeys, this internal touch journey that you were leading. And for the first time, I was able to bring my hands into my body. And gosh, I mean, it brings tears to my eyes even now because I remember like the way you led it, it was so safe and sacred, but you were also a little bit playful with it. And some of the music was like a little more upbeat. And I think that took some pressure off of me. It was like just a curious exploration. And yeah, I put my hands into my body. And for the first time, I didn't have this like sort of psychological block. And I just cried. I sobbed. I felt like I had come home to myself. And yeah, I'm just
Mm.
forever grateful to you for facilitating that moment.
Wow. This is so beautiful. And like just taking a moment to gaze into your eyes and just feel that. And even just like feeling into the palpability of how sometimes this work can feel so serious, right? Sometimes through our orientation and how we've touched into our own bodies, how we have been in the literacy and the connection and the languaging of our own bodies, that having a profound moment where we go, oh, there's a drum beat in this song that's actually calling forward the really innocent part of me, right? That's wanting to be retrieved through the practice. And I think it's really important sometimes for us to recognize that so much of what we're going to talk about today, so much of our journey of really connecting back into our bodies is a retrieval of that innocence. So thank you for trusting.
Yeah, that's totally what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so special.
Mhm.
Well, I would love for you to orient everyone to you. And the way I love for guests to do that is to share what phase of life you're in. So, whatever sort of terminology you like to use with that, whatever comes up, and also what phase of your cycle you're in.
What a beautiful question. Yeah, so at this moment, I'm kind of straddling, both life and where I am in my cyclical body. I'm orienting from my follicular time into my ovulatory time, and I can feel the bubbling of that in my spirit, in my psyche, in my somatic body. And that really correlates to, where I feel I am in the spiral of life. I feel like I'm straddling these really profound moments for myself where I am very actively and devotedly walking a conscious conception path with my beloved for many years now, feeling the baby so close and feeling this like mother energy and like the mother drum really calling for me in a way that I don't think that I've ever experienced in like my dream time, in the time that I sit with my blood and with my heart and in lovemaking and walking with the earth. There's this really palpable calling of mother that I'm feeling, while also so anchored in my maiden and feeling this kind of like, I don't know, this almost like bursting of this new archetype on the wheel of woman. Like maybe we've heard of maiden, mother, mega, crone in, the life cycles of women. And I almost feel that like there's this like fifth transitional stage that I found myself in, being a 36-year-old woman on quite a long conception journey, who has been devoting to these babies for so long, that there's this like maternal maiden that's like the
Mhm.
maiden that hasn't become mother, but definitely feels like I've gone through a maturation spiral from my maidenhood. And there's this really deep maternal downward draw of my maidenhood that I'm experiencing. Um, that's really propelling me into that drum of mother. And so, yeah, that like straddling energy feels really present for me in my life today.
Wow. Okay, this is such an interesting topic and so timely. I've been having so many conversations with this about other sisters in my life that there really is this sort of almost like mature maiden, or like you said, this maternal maiden, this space in between maiden and mother when we don't yet have our children here on this earth, but we've moved kind of from the almost carefree maiden energy into a more like responsible, holding, service-oriented energy. And I do think that that is such an important thing to bring into the conversation, this like in between maiden and mother that some of us find ourselves in. And I love the
Mhm.
way you spoke to it.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, I've been personally on a conscious conception journey, like consciously, devotedly, for 7 years now. And within that time, experiencing many, many times with my blood, babies touching into my womb and leaving my body, feeling so connected into this relationship, this like very mothering energy of my relationship to my babies that haven't quite come earthside. And I feel like this is perhaps something that we're noticing a lot more now through journeys of infertility or, taking longer for these babies to land in our bodies, that there's this like orbital transit, there's this like axis of time that perhaps hasn't been as available for future generations, that's reorienting in how I'm experiencing it personally and professionally to these other aspects of the spiral of woman that are starting to drop in through this association of more time, more consciousness in how we're calling these babies down. And that doesn't mean that a woman, who conceives quickly doesn't go through the same transit. But I think the experience of having so many years sitting in that straddling space is almost like sculpting this new territory for how maidens can rise into a very matriarchal orientation.
I love that concept, that orientation towards the longer conception journey being like this deeper preparation to enter into the mother archetype fully. That's amazing. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. It's wild. It's wild. It's grief, it's deep, it's connected, it's eyes wide open, it's a lot of surrender and a
Mm.
lot of, getting right with everything. I feel
Yeah.
like the words alignment have found new meaning for me in relationship to this particular threshold.
Yeah, I love that too about being present. You said it's grief and it's all these different things, that there are so many aspects that come into this, and it's letting go of control. And it reminds me so much of my mentor, Kristen Hauser. She was actually on the podcast a few months ago, and
Love
she was sharing
Kristen.
about, yeah, she's great. She was sharing how, motherhood really kind of forces you or invites you into being really connected to reality. And you kind of have to go all in on the reality of what's happening in your life. And I think that's really different than maidenhood, because in maiden, we're in a quite dreamy state. And I think that's really important and really beautiful. We need to have that in our lives. But it's interesting to hear about this in between space for you, this more maternal maiden energy that's like taking this amount of time, this 7 years, to move from that like dream and like feel your babies more strongly here on this earth plane over that time, as you more orient to, being present to what is. And I think that's a really profound initiation to have.
Yeah, thank you. That's such beautiful languaging for it. And I've talked about this publicly, and I've also been really private about it, but it feels really beautiful to have this conversation with you here. Like the association, I'll never forget the time where I felt my son enter into my body and his spirit touched down into my womb and pregnancy began to arrive for me. And it was the most cataclysmic, tectonic, multidimensional stroke of love that I think I'd ever experienced in my existence. And I remember being like, wow, if for the rest of my life, this is my orientation point of what I want to most deeply align myself to for myself, for this earth, for humanity, for the collective, for my service, then like I'm all in. I'm all
Mm.
into that. And so, although there's been loss and there's been grief and there's been these moments of like existential longing, like being like, wow, like how can I long so deeply for something that I actually haven't like held in my arms? Like it's a very interesting paradox. I always orient myself to that moment of being like that stroke of love. Like that is even if that baby never fully comes into form, it has completely reoriented the structure of my life. And I think that it's these moments, right, that start creating this fifth threshold of maternal maiden, where we start touching into the very real reality of what it means to align ourselves to holding life in our body. And it was a big wake
Mm.
up moment for me of like holding the responsibility of that reality, starting to like detach from the commodification of like wanting to have a child and really being like, how can I align myself so deeply to the children of this earth? Like, how can I become a match for the soul realm that they're currently existing in, which in my perception is just like a field of absolute love and dreams, like giving them a reason through the servitude of my body as a woman to become that, right? And that is a life altering experience that I've only really found language for in the last year, if I'm totally honest. Walking through and traversing through so many years of this journey and being like, wow, okay, it's finally coming into reality. It's finally coming into form. And
Mm.
if you're listening to this and you're on a conception journey, if you've been diagnosed something like infertility, or there's something symptomatically happening within your system that is like not allowing for the full alignment of that longing to come, like just really feel that for a moment. Because there's a beacon and a North Star of like, how can I align myself so deeply to that stroke of love that allows my longing to be worthwhile? And I'm really grateful for that on such a long journey.
Mm. Wow. I love the like aligning yourself to the stroke of love. And that's just, because I think there's so much that we get thrown as women of different diagnoses or, yeah, the stigma around like if you haven't conceived in a year, then it's time to consider, so and so the stuff. And I just absolutely love your totally different orientation to it around having this time and this space to fully orient yourself to the maternal energy that you like to be a vibrational match to these children coming in. Like what a frame to have for a conception journey. And I think so many women, yeah, are going to receive so much from just that little bit. And it's like if you gosh, I mean, in all the highs and lows of what it takes to be on a really intentional conception journey for 7 years, what a thing to be able to share then with other women that the medicine that you've received from this journey. Like that's paradigm shifting.
Yeah. And in a world where we're really oriented to external technology,
Yeah.
right? I always love to bring in the framework of like love and soul consciousness as a technology, right? Like there are these technologies outside of industries that are very powerful, and we get to really choose, right? We have a choice all the time. And this isn't an association of like good or bad or right or wrong or like creating any sort of dogmatic approach. I'm just speaking to the truth of my own experience. However, I believe that the word technology has been really like pigeonholed and really like narrowly placed in these external industries. And we've forgotten about the technology that holds frequencies of the unseen and the mystery that we've always attuned to. If we go into like all of the temples of Isis and, the hieroglyphics, like we've always had these technological relationships to consciousness, of body, of star, of energy. And the really deep reality of that is, the presence of our lives and being in servitude of how can we merge with our bodies as the conduit of that. And it's hard, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
don't get me wrong. There are days where I'm like, damn, this is rocking my world. Like, I'm not going to be able to fulfill the prayer and the prophecy of what this is, you know? Um, but at the end of the day, despite the grief and the longing, I mean, I feel our baby's closer than I ever have.
Mhm.
I'd rather be delusional living in a prayer of them coming and aligning my body, in such deep servitude to that, than collapsing in my own despair. And if at the end of this journey, what I have to show for it is that my babies have guided me into a deeper presencing of life and existence and being a match for love, then maybe that was the point of the mother
Mm.
journey all along.
Mm.
And that's that aspect of maternal maiden where I'm like, yeah, there's something different for me, um, in that straddling.
Yeah, I mean, such a big tenet, I think, of the maiden to mother journey is going from this place of being really like self-development focused to going to moving into a place where you're more service oriented. And I think that perspective of moving from like, I'm going into this journey with like, what am I going to get out of it? Like you said, the sort of commodification of what we are doing when we're trying to have a baby, into like, well, how can I be of service for this child to come through? And if this child isn't coming through, like, how can this still impact the way that I show up in the world? And yeah, I'm just really in awe of you being in that place and also acknowledging fully that it's not always like that. And sometimes it's full of grief and very human emotions. And I think that's like part of the going all in on reality thing too, is like honoring both. And that both are really sacred and really holy and super important in the journey. Um, I'm curious too. Well, actually, the other thing I want to say on that topic is, our fertility is like our life force. And so I love what you shared about, I'd rather be in this dreaming, vibration of love state than be like fully collapsing at what's not happening. And it's like by you being in that place, you're naturally supporting your fertility because that's like our zest for life?
Yeah, and there's
Um,
an interesting thing for me in that, right? Like, do you ever find yourself where there's like phrases or things that have kind of gone around and maybe you've even said them? And then you kind of like find yourself in the crux of a moment and you're like, I just don't know if I believe that anymore. I'm finding myself in that with absolutely no disrespect to anybody who says it, but in this space
mhm,
of like kind of questioning the narrative of our fertility as a barometer of like our vitality or our essence or
mhm,
our aliveness as women. And I've
mm.
been thinking about this a lot and just kind of like, this is my first time, having a conversation about it. So we'll see where we go with it. But I've been thinking about it a lot from the perspective of like, okay, there's actually a really profound and deep fertile quality that I sense within myself, that I walk with, that I feel vibrationally in my somatic body. And yet there isn't a translation to conceiving a child, right? So I've been
Right.
thinking about this from the perspective of like, I've got a really beautiful regular cycle. My bleed is tremendous. It's beautiful. I go into altered states of consciousness. I'm super juicy around ovulation. I just want to make love to my husband all day, right? And then there's still these aspects of like what we want to extract from our fertility and
Mm,
categorizing that in some sort of like hierarchical way of like the completeness or like the wholeness of what our fertile nature really is. And I
mm.
think it's like widening this perspective of fertility, truly. And
Yeah.
like I don't know. There's so much dynamicism and nuance to the conversation, but I've been really curious about that lately for myself.
Yeah, it is really interesting too. I it's important to have these threads of thought where we're like questioning these sort of things that have been thrown around. And I can almost see it from the other side too, of like women getting pregnant who don't necessarily feel like the most vibrant? And so that is an interesting kind of thing to hold is like, and I guess really what that is it just brings us back to the mystery. It's like we don't really know.
We don't know. We don't know.
Yeah.
Damn, I want to know
I
sometimes,
know.
but we just don't.
I mean, when I teach about the cycle, I'm like, there's so much we understand, and there's so much that we can understand. And most of us didn't learn anything physiologically about what happens in our body. And I think it's so important to like get this really basic practical education on the female reproductive system. And at the same time, there's like an inherent mystery to everything that involves the womb and so much that we will just never know. I mean, I think about it all the time, just on the most basic level of like babies entering into the world. It's like, what? There's this spirit that comes out of my body, and all of a sudden they're here on earth. Like, how could we ever pretend to understand that fully?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I say this all the time. Like when I see a pregnant woman, I just want to like bow down and kiss her
Yeah.
feet and be like, do we not see the miraculous, miracle in front of us right now? Like, stop your cars, bow down. It's quite profound. And I think there has been a desensitization
Yeah.
to the mysterious and miraculous nature of women's bodies, of all of our bodies, of course, but particularly as it pertains to this unbelievable creational field of the womb.
Yeah, I so feel you. Same thing when I see a pregnant woman. Or sometimes, do you ever do this where like you just look around at, if you're in a crowded place and you look around at all the people and you're like, every single one of these people came from a woman.
Yes. Yes. I was in an airport recently and I was bleeding and I was in like quite a state. I was just having this like very wild experience, very far away from my bleed cave in an airport. And I was looking around being like, how many people are bleeding? Like,
Yeah.
how many women around me are bleeding? And we're just like in these spaces. And like, can we feel each other? Is there some sort of like beacon or scent that we send off that we can like
Mhm.
recognize another woman in her bleeding time? But we just like, we've lost the primal gaze, or
Whoa.
we've lost the way that we would naturally like congregate because of these sterile spaces. And I went into like a whole thing. I actually wrote a poem about it on my Instagram
Um,
because I was so inspired by this thought of like, wow, all of the things that we may or may not recognize in another woman in her passing, and that like primal gaze that I feel like we're all longing for to reconnect into like bleeding together, birthing together, mothering together, breastfeeding each other's babies, right? That primal ache.
yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting thought. Like, would we have known if we still had certain like intact senses?
Mhm.
Hmm. It's an interesting thought. I'm gonna sit with that one.
Yeah.
I have so many questions about your journey, but I think I want to go back to the kind of the beginning of your bleeding journey, and then we can work our way to your conception path because I have so many questions about that. But yeah, I love for women to share their first bleed stories if you remember it or whatever that time of life was like for you, because I think that I mean, it's really our first rite of passage other than actually being born. And what's been cool about this podcast is I almost feel like I should have like young girls listen so that they can hear all these stories of first bleeds and have that normalized for them. Um, but yeah, I think it's also just important to bring these things up because it's not often something that we talk to each other about is like what happened on your first bleed. And that is a really profound moment. So I'm curious, like what you remember, if you remember
Mhm.
what that time was like for you.
Yeah. It's so beautiful to reach back, isn't it?
Hmm.
I remember kind of like hearing about what a period was before receiving the information about what it was. And I think it's really interesting. So I started bleeding when I was 10. So I was,
Whoa.
it was quite early for me. I think there was me and I remember one other girl in the school that I knew of, and we'd both gotten our periods. And it was kind of like a thing. Like they're like, whoa, like they got their periods. They're in like a different realm now. There was this like categorization. There was some women or some girls, I guess, heading into womanhood, they really wanted their periods, right? So there was this like very interesting energy surrounding first bleed that I remember. And I fully remember, this is so funny. I remember thinking that when I got my period, I was going to just basically pea blood, and there was going to be a little white egg that was going to like float on the top of the
No.
toilet water. And I remember like this was my imaginal perception of what this experience was going to be. So lo and behold, I go to the bathroom. I'm 10 years old. I've just learned, like, thank the goddess, I've just learned about what this is. But I have this very imaginal story in my mind. And I wipe my pee and there's blood there. And I remember really deep fear because it was
Mm,
so far away in contrast from this kind of like imaginal experience that I'd created that I had that
mm,
association of something's wrong.
yeah.
And I remember I was alone at home. My mom had already gone to work and I was heading to school. And I called her. I called my mom and I let her know. And she came home and she
Mm,
tended to me. And I stayed home that day, and got to learn a little bit about what that experience was and learning about taking time. And, um, I think from that moment on, it was pretty business as usual, right? You just
mm,
either like wore a pad or you stuck a tampon up there and you were just kind of like integrated into society as if everything was normal. Right. And I remember that being quite strange. I remember feeling like, wow, this is a really weird experience that no one else knowingly is having. And I'm having to just like go to school and I'm
yeah.
having to just like figure out how to go swimming with my friends. And then I remember, I can't remember if it was like a few months later or 6 months later, I was wearing these white capri pants. I'm sure we can all imagine where this story is going. And I was at school and I got up, I went and got something, I sat back down, and I had a teacher. His name was Mr. Hayes, male teacher. And he came up to me and he said, Jasmine, I really need to talk to you about something. And he actually like stood me up and walked me out of the classroom so that he was covering my back end and I had blood all over my pants. And he
Oh,
escorted me out and supported me. I think we called my mom and he supported me on my journey to make sure that, that experience was going to be tender and private and it wasn't going to be this like really monumentous event where I was teased. And I always thought about that later in life, reflecting on the presence of the masculine in that moment, right? Like him really having the ability to like rise up, literally walk me out and give me what I need. So when I
wow.
reflect on my earlier years of menstruation, although I was really, really young, like I feel like I was quite young in comparison to a lot of the conversations that I've had. It was quite a positive experience. And
Mm,
when I reflect on it, I'm really grateful for that. The only piece that feels sticky is that like reintegration into everything being normal and kind of that
right.
privatization. That still has a little bit of a charge for me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing. It's so many things there. It's so interesting that often I think the initial imprint is either like fear or shame. Like you were saying, there was a little bit of like fear. And other women, they feel that shame. And I think those are imprints that tend to live in our wombs that like a lot of us have to really consciously work through with whatever practices we work through. But I love that you had safe adults in your life to walk you through this experience. Like your mom coming home and just being with you for the day, like that's so sweet. And I love the thread about this male teacher, like just like literally having your back.
Literally having my back, showing up for me in such a big way. And that memory only came back to me in the last couple of years. And I was like,
Wow.
Mr. Hayes, I remember. So if you're listening to this, Mr. Hayes, thank you for showing up for the ladies.
Yeah, like how sweet, to be able to do that for like a young girl to make sure that she didn't feel embarrassed, and that requires like some sense of like, not feeling embarrassed himself, which not all men have. And so yeah, I really love that imprint. And then the thing I really want to talk about is that I think most of us have this sense of even if our first bleed was like fine, there wasn't, a huge imprint of shame or like not being held. There's that lack of like you are a new person now, like you have entered into this new territory. I've been talking to a friend of mine, Madeline, a lot lately about rites of passage and how one of the most important parts of a rite of passage is being welcomed back into the community as someone new.
Yeah.
And that's definitely missing in most of our menarche stories. And
Hmm.
I think that on a certain level, even as girls, we have an idea that, like, of course, we know that we're changed, that something has changed. But when we're so young and it's not mirrored back to us by like adults, by elders, it's really hard. We can't hold that on our own. Like we need help holding that. And I mean, that's something I hope to bring back into the consciousness by sharing these stories on this podcast and women like my friend Tatiana, who wrote a book, Path to Puberty, who's like sharing this info with moms about how to really hold this space with reverence. I think it's a really big cultural moment for that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, there's so many things happening around that time, right? I know for me, I was going through a really challenging time in my childhood as I was receiving my menstruation. And I feel like, having touched trauma, perhaps for my first time in my life, around the time that I was also coming into this rite of passage of becoming a woman, there was this like, when I touch into it now, kind of this overwhelming sense of responsibility,
Mm.
right? And like, I remember, and even now, I'm sure all of us have memories of this, like hearing the guardians and the women in my life and the way that they spoke about their bodies, the way that they spoke about what a bleed was, the way that they spoke about, men and sexuality and like the imprinting of the external voices and how women were speaking to their own experiences. It did feel like a tremendous responsibility that wasn't centered around reverence, right? It was centered around lack. It was centered around, how annoying it is when we're bleeding, because these are all the things we can't do, or these are all the things that we feel, or what a terrible inconvenience it is for these aspects of our female physiology, which are really these, built-in rites of passage that we go through as women. There wasn't a reverence, it was a responsibility. And that responsibility was really clouded by lack. So when I like touch back in, it's like the story of menstruation, there's also these concentric circles around everything else that was being experienced by me in my life as a young girl and as a woman, and the deep, palpable ache for something that I didn't even know was possible, right? I think we can all feel into that. It's like that, just what you spoke to, that feeling of like wanting the acknowledgement, wanting the witnessing, wanting some sort of like, hey, everybody, like I'm bleeding, I'm a woman now. Oh, we just have to go to math class. Okay, cool. And we learn in those moments how to really suppress the deep acknowledgement and witnessing, self-witnessing and community-based acknowledgement of these moments. And I feel like for many women, myself included, that actually trickles into our later years of puberty, into our adolescent time, and for many women, through the whole life cycle of who they are. And so sharing these stories, it's also an opportunity to be like, how can I course correct the way that
Mhm.
I speak about my body in front of everyone, the way that
Mhm.
I hold my body, the way that I speak about other women? One little story. So
Yeah.
I, every year for the last 3 years, facilitate at a beautiful festival called Earth Daughters here in Canada.
Mhm.
And last year I was teaching and guiding this really beautiful connection to the entirety of our woman, really. It was like a breast massage, and it was belly and umbilicus and Mount of Venus and vulva, and it was absolutely stunning. This was the first year that we had young girls at the festival. Okay, so some young girls ended up coming at the end, and I was doing some questions, and one of the girls said, "You mentioned something about not sucking in your belly." And I said, "Yeah, you know, not sucking in your belly. What do you want to know about that?" And I believe that this girl was about 8. And she said, "I have to suck in my belly." She said, "I'm so nervous about what the other girls and boys will think that I always suck in my belly." Right. And I'm very aware in that moment of how I'm holding my posture. I'm very aware in that moment of how I'm breathing, right? And being a mirror and a nervous system for her to orient to. And I remember looking at her and saying, no one else's perception of you is worth restricting your vitality. By sucking in your belly, you're restricting your life force and your breath and the aliveness of your body for someone else's perceptions, and nobody's perceptions are worth that. And it was a really beautiful moment. It was like, we get to almost like speak to our 8-year-old self that didn't get to hear that, right? And so there's all these concentric circles of when we have the opportunity with beautiful women like you to share our stories, we also get to like touch into those circles and go, okay, knowing what I know now, how can I actually change even like the indirect proverbial framework of how I'm contributing to this next spiral of young girl to woman?
I love that story.
It was so good. And like these young girls, I could have sat at their feet forever. They had so much wisdom. Had so much like
Yeah.
I just learned so much from them that whole weekend.
Yeah.
But that moment, it was like this is a micro of a macro. And we have a beautiful opportunity to honor that here.
Yeah. Well, and it just reminds me too, it's like so much more than what we teach girls through like what we say. And it's so much about, like you said, like how you're holding your nervous system, how you're holding your body. Like they're picking up on all of that. Um, it reminds me, there's where I'm staying here, I'm living off grid on it's a horse ranch and she does horse lessons and sometimes young girls come for horse lessons. And there's been a couple times where some of the girls stay the night in the bunkhouse that's kind of by attached to where I live. And so one night, these two girls, they were 12 and 14, came and spent the night. And I had a chocolate bar. And I was like, do you girls like chocolate? Do you want some chocolate? And they're like, yeah, we love chocolate. And then one of them goes, yeah, especially when, it's that time of the month for me. And I was like, ah, you've gotten your period. And it just became this really sweet opportunity. And I was like, I love my period and I love eating chocolate on my period and I love doing this on my period. And they were so interested because they had never heard anyone say, I love my period before. They were like, what? You love your period? And I was like, yeah, it's like I get to rest. I get to take care of myself. It's this really special time. And also, did you girls know that each phase of your cycle is different and you get to experience this different energy? And they were just like soaking it all in. And it
Yes.
was just like this sweet moment to be able to share that with them and to see their enthusiasm and like this receptivity to it. But also such a sweet moment for me to feel like, in a way, I was healing like the inner girl in myself who didn't hear those things.
Totally. And
Yeah.
there's actually this whole other side to this conversation. I was recently home with my grandparents in Eastern Canada, and I was sitting with my grandmother. Same trip that I was just speaking to. That's where I was flying when I was having this
Okay.
like massive revelation in the airport. So I'm bleeding and I'm grateful to be bleeding because there was a palpable tenderness that I was arriving to my family with. I could feel
Mm,
how unguarded I was, how unarmored I was. It's like the full saturation of my womb and my vaginal tissues and my vulva became the entirety of my body, became my heart and my jaw and my gaze. And that's my favorite thing about when I bleed. It's like there's no opportunity for me to be guarded. And
yeah.
it gets to be this really beautiful leader. So I'm sitting with my grandmother and we're having a conversation and I share with her that I'm bleeding. Like I was just like, oh yeah, like if I'm a little bit, slower to respond, I am bleeding right now. And she immediately reaches out, oh, I'm so sorry. Right. So she's consoling me as if I'm going through this process that needs an apology. Right. And I look at her and I go, oh, grandma, like there's nothing to apologize. I absolutely love bleeding. And she's staring at me, she's in her 70s and she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, when I bleed, grandma, I feel so soft and so loving. And I'm so connected to God. It's like God's voice is just like speaking through my body. And I go on this whole poetic journey with her. I'm like, let's just let it all out here. And she grabbed
Wow.
my hands and she goes, I've never heard somebody say something like that. So similar to what you're speaking to, right? A 12-year-old woman in her 70s. I've never heard anybody say that before, right? And I could
Mm.
feel the healing in this moment. And my grandma opens up then. She starts telling me stories of her period. She's telling me stories of pregnancy, of miscarriages, of an experience starkly similar to mine, which maybe we'll get into in a moment, of bleeding for a full year that led to a hysterectomy for her.
Whoa.
And it was all through this not correcting, but kind of this loving correction of this time actually doesn't need an apology, right? It's actually quite beautiful. And when we can be the beacon for that, we open up all of these, undiscovered realms for every single person that we're sitting with. It could be a man, it could be a child, it could be a grandmother, it could be a grandfather. Every single person on this earth, something in them de-armors when they don't feel like we are braced for our female physiological nature. It's like a
Mm.
really deep, important medicine for humanity. So it's just so cool to feel the sameness of response of like a 12-year-old and a woman in her 70s. We
Yeah,
all need to hear it.
we do. Wow, I love that story. I felt myself tearing up a little bit. Just how sweet that that was able to open up this thread of connection between you and your grandmother. And
Mhm.
that's like the power of like sometimes I feel so strange being around other people when I'm bleeding because you are in this like extremely unguarded, vulnerable, like tender is the way I always describe it. I'm like very tender. And I also say like I'm more permeable. Like life just affects me more, everything gets in easier. But I love that you're spinning this in like a really beautiful way and saying you are grateful to be in that space around your family because you couldn't be guarded. And I think that in and of itself is could shift a lot for me and for other women listening of like, yeah, it's okay. And like we can be in that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I'd love to continue on the thread of your journey. So your first bleed comes. What are those like teenage cycling years like for you?
Yeah. You know, when I really feel into that time of my life, and I touched on this a little bit, I had gone through a really significant violation in my younger years. And that violation really walked with me a lot into my teenage years. I started drinking at a really young age. I started doing drugs at a really young age. My association to my body, when I really reflect on it, I can access so much less of how I would gaze into the memory of like my cycle or my sensuality or my softness because there's this overshadowing of the pain body. And that really deserves to have just as much of a voice, right? Because it impacted so much of my ability to feel like I could fully occupy myself as a woman because there was this really stark violation that was, really sitting in the way that I sense it, like at the back of my pelvis. And so when I feel into those really formative years where I would be forming a relationship with my female physiology, I actually just wanted to run away from it. I wanted to be really, really numb. And there was a lot of time spent in my time growing up where I was really disassociated and disconnected from my body. So being able to retrieve memory of like my cyclic years, of like my sensual body, of my puberty, it was just a really deep time of disassociation. And what's cool about that, not that like anything's cool about really deep trauma, but when we're on the other side and we can access a bit of hindsight, I remember bleeding, right? Like I remember being in a bleeding body, having a very regular cycle. Everything was predictable. I had, a boyfriend and, had to really like come into cyclic awareness and spent a little bit of time on birth control. So it's interesting for me to touch back and reflect on the depth of disassociation and pain body that I was living in, and yet my body still spiraled on.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really interesting thing to touch into of like the way that the spirals of our feminine nature, of our female physiology continue even when we are in some of our deepest pain. even when we are in active addiction, even when we are deeply disassociated. And so it's a bit of an interesting answer to your question, but it feels like what's most present here today.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me too of just what we were sharing earlier about like fertility and life force and questioning like, is that even real? It's like our our body just there's so much we don't know. And at the same time, like our wombs are so resilient. And yeah, it's so interesting to note that there was all this going on in the background, and yet you're still cycling and still moving through these normal cycles. It reminds me too, sometimes I think of, like there's plenty of women I know who have a healthy cycle who perhaps don't live as healthy of a life as I think I do or something. And it's like, huh.
Oh yeah. I mean, when we really zoom out, right, there are people in active heroin addiction who can become
Yeah.
pregnant, right? And
Yeah.
then there's women like myself who are praying every morning and vaginal steaming and eating ancestral foods and hands-on practices and like really walking in this way. And again, like life and these sacred souls that are coming will meet us when the medicine is needed.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important dismantling process that we need to go through when we're in orientation to the journey of woman. And like, I think because of the journey that I've been through, particularly with a lot of, sexual trauma and a lot of violation and a lot of disassociation, that then led to self-medication of addictions and, all of these things, there's a degree of compassion and empathy that I've been able to really access in like the humanity of women. Like how much pain we can really endure and still get up
Yeah.
every day and do what needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
Um, and not that I ever wish that a woman needs to become that resilient. However, that degree of resiliency, I believe, is really cultivated in the soil of my womb in particular. Like my womb has been such an unbelievable guiding star in times of such deep disorientation and disassociation to stay within a rhythm, I think is like
Mhm.
an unbelievable guide and guardian that I want a lot of women to know about more because I think a lot of us are living in times where things are quite uncertain. And when we can reorient to like this living, breathing rhythm within us, which is why birth control has so many consequences within the psyche of woman because
Mhm.
we're quite literally halting her ability to find her place on the rhythm,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
built-in rhythm is like this undulation and this association, even in times where we might feel really psychologically disassociated. And if a woman can find herself back on that rhythm, I've witnessed women who are feeling so far away from themselves find this really beautiful anchor within their bodies that guides them back into coherence.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I often share with women like one of the most profound things you can do is just begin tracking your cycle, even if on a most basic level, you're just like day one, two, three, four, whatever, because it's like that rhythm is incredibly grounding. It's like I feel that way so often where like everything in my life could be sort of going haywire and I could not know what's coming next in so many ways. And yet I'm on day 16 of my cycle and I know what to expect on that day.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly grounding and it brings us home to like our true root, our true center. And yeah, things like birth control do kind of take that away from us. And that's why I think so many women come off birth control. And all of a sudden, I've walked with a lot of women coming off birth control, and most of them have this experience of like their physical symptoms returning, but also they feel like all of these emotions, essentially what it is their people-pleasing tendencies have gone out the window now that they're off birth control. And then they're like, whoa, I all of a sudden things are affecting me more and people are upsetting me and I'm annoyed and I'm angry. And it's like, yeah, you're back.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. The ovarian field is like a photosynthesis for a woman's true nature. So when we aren't ovulating, it's almost like we're not watering the well of that really deep nature within a woman. And when that water comes back and she feels saturated and she can receive that like photosynthesis light where she can regenerate her own life force within her body again, it's a pretty tremendous thing. I mean, I've walked and witnessed women leaving their husbands, leaving jobs of 15, 20 years, completely shifting the orientation of their life because a primal nature bigger than the technology of birth control can begin to occupy her and she remembers who she is again, right?
Yeah.
And of
Mm,
course, there is a really big conversation that we could have around birth control. But I think it's important to also share these qualities of stories of like, there is something beyond birth control. We've talked a lot about like technologies within this conversation, right? So, like, remembering that the womb has a built-in technology that will surpass any pharmaceutical, any algorithm, any predictability. And she'll call you into what I like to call the mother tongue of our bodies. It's like
mm,
we're beginning to learn a different language. And there is a process of us not being able to understand what we're hearing that intensifies and becomes more clear and coherent the more that we come into connection with it.
I love that. The mother tongue. That's so good. Yeah. Mm. So when did you begin this journey into knowing your womb? Like, what was the initiation into that?
Yeah. My initiation into my womb was enormous. And I touched little bit of a teaser talking about grandma's story, which I didn't know until this January, which is why this is so phenomenal.
Wow.
That when my beloved and I started to have the conversation of wanting to consciously conceive, within that cycle, I woke up one day and started bleeding thick black blood from my womb. Um, Blood so thick that if I was to insert a menstrual cup into my body, which is what I was using at the time, I could flip it upside down and it would just like sludge so slowly out. And I proceeded to bleed this way for a year straight. And that experience, I mean, I feel like I truly died and was reborn. The woman that I was prior to that experience and who I am now, it's almost unrecognizable. Um, and I really didn't know what to do with what was happening to me. I had no orientation to, spiritual connections in the way that I do now. I didn't have a relationship with the goddess. I didn't know what blood rituals were. There was just like zero framework for me to orient myself to. And physiologically, I had no literacy of what was happening in my body because of most of what we've been talking about. I'd been in a really disassociated state. And it wasn't until kind of this like spark of me wanting to bring life into my womb that my womb kind of interjected and was like, hey, if we are wanting to do this really miraculous big thing together, we're going to need to come into relationship. And that bleeding for an entire year, I've sat with so much reflection. This was um, almost 8 years ago now, so a long time ago. And when I sit in reflection of that, it literally felt like my womb was weeping. Like she was just crying and crying and crying. Tears of my life, tears of my mother's life, tears of my grandmother's and my great grandmother's life. So much violation, so much self abandonment, so much
Mm.
lack of reverence, so much extraction and extortion. And it was like the pain body through the red thread, through that unbroken thread of my matrilineal line, had found its way into my womb. And I was being asked to serve and to really offer myself to what this blood was representing, which was this enormous song of this ends with me. All of this ends with me. And through that journey, I was offered two options. One was to go on birth control, and the other was to consider a potential, either a medicated route or a partial hysterectomy to stop this bleeding because it was so intense. It was so intense in my system. Those were just
Yeah.
ridiculous options for me. And so I very quickly reoriented out of, the allopathic system that just couldn't offer me anything. And I started to
Yeah.
really go into this. I mean, we talk about altered states of consciousness. I was like literally in between worlds for an entire year. I mean, the life force of my physical body was so challenged and compromised. There was just so much happening for me. So, through this really tremendous journey, I started to follow my blood. I started to really go, okay, blood, like if we are going to do this and we're just going to like day after day after day after week after month, um, be in this continuous cycle, I started to recognize that there was actually a rhythm within a rhythm. There was a sensational attunement that I was starting to have to my womb. There was this really deep recognition of where I had suppressed and almost offered this beautiful hollow organ of my body as a receptacle rather than a reverent space of my life force. And that I had some cleaning up to do. And that became my life and is now continued as my life. So my blood became the medicine that I'd been looking for my entire lifetime. And through
Mm.
that process, I started recognizing blood as a guardian and a really profound medicine that parallels all other medicines on this planet. And I started recognizing the depth of consciousness that I could access through this blood. And I started really working with it as if I was working with any other sacred medicine. And through that, was able to heal my womb. And beyond the healing of my womb, was able to come into such a sacred relationship that I actually oriented my entire life to the servitude of what coming into relationship with my womb might be. Um, and when I say I died 1,000 deaths, I'm not being dramatic or embellishing. It has
Mm.
required a unbelievable and like unparamount degree of devotion to really stay within that listening and to really learn this mother tongue in which feels like an echo of an ancient language that my soul maybe skipped 3 or 4 lifetimes in listening to. And so we're like on this really deep soul journey of listening to the language of the womb. And it's been through my blood.
Hmm. What a big story. I think I've heard you share about it in little bits and pieces online on your platform before. But to have that, yeah, that amount of thick black blood and allow that to like bring you into this deeper connection. It's like those kind of experiences in our lives when our wombs initiate us in these like big, profound ways. It's like I mean, of course, we always have a choice, but you made the choice rather than to medicate with birth control or have a partial hysterectomy, which are crazy options and options that are offered to lots of women, unfortunately. But you made the decision to change your life and to change your life to live in devotion to your womb. And I think so often, like those of us who are like deeply on this path, it's like that's why, is because that was the choice that we really were offered is, like, can you fully surrender any other idea of what life is supposed to be and live in alignment with your center. And like you said, to listen to that mother tongue. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So lo
wow.
and behold, when my grandmother tells me, right, that she had a similar sameness experience and chose to have the hysterectomy years and years and years later after my experience, to feel, talk about reality, right? We have this like conceptual, intangible relationship with ancestral healing a lot of the time. And that for me was like, boom. Like I was literally given the embodied experience of a living grandmother and chose to not only keep my womb, but become a steward of her. And it was like one of those moments for me, where everything like really made sense, like in the most profound way. I was like, wow, this is evolutionary medicine that's healing her, right? Because I'm sharing my story with her and she's seeing all of the possibilities and all of the ways, and that a woman loves her blood and she's getting to receive that quite literally. Like I have chills on my body feeling the way that this ripples before us and beyond us in the most tangible, like my grandmother's hands in my hands way. And this is it, right? We are in a precipice of time right now where there is an alarming amount of dis-ease and expression of the pain body within our wombs. And if we're not okay with saying that, if we don't really take a look at it, if we start just desensitizing ourselves and thinking that things like endometriosis and PCOS and infertility and painful menstruation, that all of these are just like chalked up to the normal woman experience, we're never going to create the space for what's actually needed, which is coming back into reverent honoring and witnessing of the rites of passage of women so we can begin to pass the pain body from our wombs rather than holding her as that hollow organ as a receptacle. And I believe that this is what I know my path has become. But we're in this time right now where so many of us are being asked to be that too.
Yeah, the story with your grandmother is so absolutely inspiring. And one of those stories where it's like, exactly as you said, like it brings, I love those moments when we do have these ideas of things that seem a little intangible. But we still, we still feel the truth of them. But then when you have a lived experience that brings that thing like ancestral healing to the very tangible, real world, that is so magnificent. And I think it's so interesting too that you didn't know about that story until years after your experience, and that you did make this like very independent, sovereign decision, but that you were also, perhaps being guided by ancestors and in other ways to be this healing person in your lineage. And I also think it's so fascinating to, reorient ourselves to the mother tongue of our bodies, as you've called it, and to understand that like our wombs, I always say this, it's like our wombs are never trying to punish us with what's happening. It's not this like disciplinary punishment energy. It's this like loving communication. It's like, hey, here is what I have to offer you. And to see this experience of bleeding black blood for a year, which could have been taken, and I'm sure was often taken as a scary, confusing, heartbreaking reality, to also see it as medicine is, I think that's just what it means to come into relationship with your womb. It's like it's
Mhm.
everything that's happening becomes the medicine.
Yeah. And I remember so clearly when my blood shifted from that black blood and it started shifting into red fluidity. And I remember when that moment arrived, something so instinctual and primal happened for me that I will never, if I wasn't straddling, these altered states of consciousness for as long as I had been, it might not have happened. And I remember just reaching into my vulva and taking that red blood and putting it on my tongue. I remember like receiving the medicine of that moment so directly. and recognizing, like, in the most primal parts of my cerebellum, of like my consciousness of my psyche as a woman, being like, okay, like this is different now. This is no longer like the clearing of a wound. We've entered into wisdom time. So
Mm.
what are we going to do with this? And that moment really marked a pivotal expression and experience for me in my relationship to my blood that I've really had to forge and fortify through my own relationship. None of this has been through the reading of a book or listening to someone else's story or, receiving some sort of like download from whatever source, we're listening or we're like audibly interacting with. This has been from like really deep physiological and multidimensional attunement to the womb. And that moment for me marked something really precious. One, it was like the re-receiving of like the entirety of who I was as a woman. And
Mm.
again, that threshold from we're no longer in the wound. And we need to remember that as women. And I think this is an association with that kind of like maiden medicine that we were speaking to, right? That personal development, that like what other wounds can I pick at and
Mm.
stir and like be in the cauldron of? It's like, women, please hear me when I say, like, it's wisdom time. Like,
Yeah.
come into wisdom time. And you're going to find it in those subtle, quiet, won't ever make the gram moments of your life. It's going to be like bleeding at the base of a tree. It's going to be like noticing the sacred waters of your amrita, of your cervical fluids. It's going to be those quiet moments holding your breast. It's going to be gazing at your vulva. It's going to be kissing the foreheads of your children. Like, it's going to be quiet, but it's like there's just this like echo chamber of my womb that says every day, okay, women, it's wisdom time. And we've all got to
Mm.
find our way to that right now.
Mm. That's such a beautiful way to put it, from like going from sort of excavating these wounds to, I love the terminology of wisdom time. It reminds me so much of just, the first few years that I was really working with yoni steaming and returning my blood to the earth. Those were my two like touch point practices that I really began with on my womb journey. And when I first started those practices, it was so much about excavation of wounds and trauma healing and processing and ancestral healing and so much crying and raging and all of this stuff and like giving my blood to the earth and being like, please release all this stuff from this blood, like all of that, the release, the release, the release. And I remember it was almost not even perceivable when it shifted for me into just doing these things as an act of devotion to my body and just being
Mm,
in reverence to my womb. And yeah, I guess that's what w wisdom time is. And I just love that terminology.
mm. Yeah, and we can feel it. There's always a palpable feelingness to it. But sometimes we also need
Yeah.
the invitation to come into it, right? There can be a really deep orientation to the wounds of our womb, much like the
Mhm.
wounds of our ancestors, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we just need to like widen the perception of like where wisdom hugs the wound, where wisdom has come
Mm.
into a deeper orientation than the wound. Because for many of us, we
Mm.
just don't even recognize that we are full of the wisdom way. We're constantly looking outside of us. We feel like we're the wounded ones, and there's another wise woman who's wiser than us. And so, even feeling into this beautiful journey that you described at the beginning of our conversation, right? Of coming into this association of touch in these deepest places of yourself. No one did that. That was you, right? So we can have these like space holders and we can have this music and we can have the guardian of the space. But there was a wise woman inside of you in that moment that was like, okay, we're going to come and we're going to touch things differently. And that's a
Yeah.
moment like we're describing.
Yeah. Yeah. Such like a small, sweet, just me in my bedroom moment. But I mean, it was one of the most profound moments of my life.
Hmm.
Yeah. And you're right. It is these little moments with ourselves that bring us into that inner wise woman.
Mhm.
Mm.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, wow, you've been on such a journey, and I'm curious to know, like, who are you now? Like, in this moment, after all of these big experiences, like, yeah, who are you right now? Who
Who
has this
am
journey
I?
led you to become?
Wow, who am I? You know, this is a question that I ask myself daily.
Mm.
I sit with myself and I'm like, okay, soul, hey, body, hey, dreams, hey, prayers. Who are we today? What are we serving today? How can we be in service to who we're becoming today?
Mm.
And when I feel into the trajectory of where my womb has taken me into now, I mean, I've been sober. I just celebrated 5 years of sobriety, of full
Really?
sobriety. Um, and that journey was absolutely prompted by my womb. I mean, if I wasn't descended into my womb, I wouldn't have felt capable to feel everything that I'd been self-medicating. And so
Um,
that like reassociation of like having the opportunity to be in my body gave me the ability to walk a path of sobriety and really be and feel and be fully present to my life, which at many points in my life would have been really scary. So this like fortified courage to be fully here and to like kind of
mm.
laugh at the depth of humanity that we've been gifted. I mean, sometimes I sit there and
Yeah.
I'm in moments of like absolute grief and I'm like, what a time to be alive, Like at one point we would have numbed this away and here we are and there's like this this palpable gratitude. Like I can feel tears, like this palpable gratitude of my womb becoming this space that asked me to fully occupy my life. And so when I feel into the answering of that question, it's like, I'm really here. That's who I am today. I'm really here. And I feel an enormous amount of gratitude for walking myself home to my womb in such a um like lay myself down at the feet of God of the goddess kind of way because now I have this incredible opportunity to not only be this woman that I am but to serve this work and to really like sit with women and be like, hey, like I'm not walking your life and I won't ever pretend that I have all of the wisdom or the ways for you to walk through, but I'm here, right? And we can walk this fire together because I know how it feels to die at the feet of the goddess. I know how it
Mm.
feels to have to shift the entire orbital field and axis of who we are to come into right relationship with who we're meant to be. I know that flame. And so now as I walk through my life and I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, it's like my womb really guided me into that occupation. And that's beyond service for me. That's like personal as well as what I bring to this world, to this life through my service.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think that living with our wombs and living with our cycles, it brings us into this like deep gratitude for just we change so much throughout our cycles, of course, and then we change so much throughout our cycling years. Like every cycle we become someone new and there's this like mini death and rebirth constantly. And there's so much to feel. And that is something that I've noticed in my journey and the women I know's journeys to coming home to their bodies and to their wombs and to following the rhythms of their cycles, this increased sensitivity to life and to feeling all of life. And when you were sharing about sometimes you're in this like depth of grief and you're just like, wow, I get to feel this. I can totally relate to that. Oh my gosh, I had a really big life experience last fall and was in like months of grief and tears. And I would just sit there and look at the river and be like, wow, being human is such a trip. Like I get to feel these deep, big things.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
it's so wild. And like, for anyone listening, I hope you don't feel like we're oversimplifying the depths
Yeah.
of the human experience. And like this is an aspect of what you were mentioning in your conversation with Kristen, right? There's like
Mhm.
a reality to it as well of like, okay, cool, and we're here.
Yeah.
Like how can we one not privatize the experiences that are really deep and dark? How can we not self-isolate?
Mm.
And how can we actually work with the energies of like grief, of longing, of despair to be a catalyst for what actually wants to come through?
Mm.
Um, and that gets to be a really human experience that sometimes, particularly for me, with a lot of like numbing out and disassociation, can also be like a really like, wow, okay, we can be a bit grateful for how much we can feel. And damn, this is a lot, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And feeling it is how we keep the womb and the heart a clear channel, which is so, yeah, profound. Mm.
Mhm.
Oh, Jasmine, we're getting to the end of our time and you've shared so much already. But I love to ask if there's a piece of womb wisdom that you'd like to leave the woman listening with, or anything else you feel needs to be said. I would love to give you space to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just like feeling into my own womb
Hmm.
in response to that, letting it just drop down and rise up. The piece that's really coming to heart. There's two. One
Mm.
is the really deep awareness of how we speak about our bodies as women. It feels like we touched on something really profound around that. And so, a wisdom for all of us women to sit with is the sacred responsibility of how we language our bodies, how we language the shapes of our bodies, the textures of our bodies, the fluids of our bodies, all of these aspects of us. Let's really hold sacred responsibility and be in right relationship with that languaging so that we can be part of the paradigm that shifts how these younger generations have the opportunity to walk through life with their bodies and the templates and the languages and how we speak to them. Feels really important. So thank you. The second is like your blood, my loves. Your blood is the most powerful, life giving medicine on this earth. I'm just going to say it. It is the most powerful, life giving medicine on this earth. And so, wherever you are on your journey, if you are a bleeding woman at this time, create relationship with her. She is going to share with you wisdoms that many reach for psychedelics to receive.
Hmm.
And if we can recognize that the sacred relationship with psychedelics that we have, speaking to this with so much reverence, is meant to mirror back to us what is within the codex and the medicine of our blood, we will start to really integrate what these sacred medicines are wanting to teach us. And so your blood gets to be the place where you lay in ceremony every single moon. And when you come into contact with that blood, offer it to the earth, anoint your heart, anoint your sisters. Really feel and receive that you are carrying really sacred ancient medicine and let it become that mother tongue. And I'm so looking forward to hearing from any of you that listen to this episode the wisdom of your mother tongue. I would love to hear how she speaks through you because it's unique and only you have it. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Well, Jasmine, if you want to share where women can find you and any offerings that feel like they want to come through in this moment, I would love to give you an opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, so I've got a really beautiful Instagram community at jasminerose.ca. I like to speak in a lot of poetry, so you'll usually find me there speaking on some sort of beauty way of the spiral of woman. I have a really beautiful program called Altar, which has some of the practices that we were speaking about with hands-on work, self-facilitated hands-on work. It's a beautiful 3-month journey where we come into contact with the altars of our bodies as women, of our breasts, of our bellies, our umbilicus, our mound of Venus, vulva, vaginal canal, cervix. It's a beautiful journey for us to reignite and evoke the sacred flame through self-facilitated hands-on practices. And so it's a beautiful place to come and just bathe yourself in really sacred remembering. And I offer mentorships with women called the Womb Wisdom Mentorship. So if you're wanting a little bit more one-on-one support, if you're wanting to deep dive, or you're going through something where you're like, yeah, this is a rite of passage and I want that sacred witnessing, come be held. It's a beautiful space and container. And beyond that, I just love community. So say hi in the Instagram world. I'd love to hear how this episode landed for you. And yeah, again, hear that womb wisdom from your own heart.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. It has been so special to have you here. I've just absolutely loved this conversation and appreciate you sharing your experiences and the wisdom that you've received from them.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you for tuning into the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly such an honor to bring these stories forward to you, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it could reach more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to join our online community, the Cyclical Living Circle, in the show notes below. There, you'll also find the links to book one-on-one virtual sessions, shop the herbal shop, and any group programs that I'm currently offering. Plus, you can follow me on Instagram, and I love to connect with you all there. All right, see you next week.